Hi, how's it going? Guys, today we're going to be taking a look at one of my favourite gadgets that I have, and that is a robot vacuum. Now I just want to thank Ecovacs for sponsoring this video and sending me the new T20 model. In this video, we're going to go over all of the features, we're going to do some very hard tests, and I'm going to give you my thoughts now that I've been using it for a few weeks. And most importantly, we're going to go over the carnage that was made by me getting the T20 to clean up this. But first, let's go back in time to when I opened the box so you can see what we actually get inside. It's a bit big. It's also very, very heavy. So we start off, we get a little card on top which tells us about, well, it's a quick start card. Inside we have box number 1. This is the robot vacuum. And there is the base station. I'll be honest, there isn't a lot of space in my office for this. So we have 2 of the mop pads at the top here. We have little brushes. They spin around and flick all the dirt into the vacuum. We have a power cable, and a little cleaning brush. We got an absolute whopper of a manual, and then inside here is our vacuum, which actually, when you compare it to the rest of it and all the boxes and stuff, is the smallest thing here. Now you don't have to have the mop pads installed from what I'm aware, only if you want to be doing mopping. If you want to actually just use the vacuum mode and you don't want these on, you can do that. Although it cleans itself, it dries itself, and it lifts them up out of the way of carpets. So why wouldn't you keep them on? So please remove all protective materials before use. So let's see what we've got. So we've got a cover here, magnetically attached as well, which is nice. And inside here you can now see all of the sort of inner workings. We have a power switch to make sure we turn it on, a connecting, is that connect? That's just like sort of status lights up here. You can see you got this little thing here which is like your LiDAR sensors and stuff. True detect sensors on the front as well. Sensors around the sides. It's pretty kitted out. There's cameras all along the bottom, so you can see when it gets to like the edge of a step or something like that, it detects it using all of these sensors all the way around, and it knows that you're at the edge of a step. Don't go off the edge. Now, before we get onto the tests, let's see what this thing can do. So this robot vacuum will vacuum, mop with spinning pads that will automatically raise, I think, 9mm to go over carpets. Super cool. It has the Omni station, which not only empties the dustbin in the thing into its own bigger dust bag, but it also washes the pads with warm water at 131 degrees Fahrenheit or about 55 degrees Celsius. Now that is the perfect temperature because it's hot enough that it's going to break down oils and stuff like that that's picked up by the pads, but it's not so hot that certain things will start clunking and clumping up to it like it's being cooked. And then not only does it clean them, but it then dries them so that the bacteria and stuff can't grow on those pads. It's very clever and it allows you to have a robot vacuum like this with as little fuss as possible. You can control it with voice commands, with Alexa, you can control it with the app, or even just buttons on the T20 or the Omni station. Now the day-to-day use of this thing is great, and I have tons of thoughts about the things that I love about it and some of the things that annoy me a little bit. But first, let's put this thing through a few tests. For our vacuuming challenge, I sprinkled some salt all over our rug. I did get some in my eye though. Now it's sea salt. After, I went and created an obstacle course to sort of test out the obstacle avoidance on this thing. And finally, we've just had a new kitchen fitted in our house, and it is really nice. And like the good doting husband that I am, I immediately ruined it. I made a huge mess on the floor. We have pesto, barbecue sauce, ground pepper, whole peppercorns for some of that rolling action. And as it is the Christmas season, I also had some gravy, which is way too watery to actually, if I was consuming this gravy, it would have been a crime, and I apologise for that. And some festive cranberry sauce. I also cooked and sprinkled some spaghetti around the place for that little bit of extra sticky solid action. Now, I will just put a disclaimer out there. These tests are not normal scenarios. They are pushing this thing to its absolute limit. In no way am I expecting it to do fantastically well, but I will judge it harshly based on the results. In the first salty test, we had bits of salt getting deep into the rug, And not only that, piles of salt piling up quite high on top as well. Now, I went into the app and I chose one of the modes that you can do, which is the area mode, which I used for 2 of these tests. And what that essentially means you can do is you can select an area that you want it to clean. So for example, if there's a mess on the floor near you and you just want it to clean that area, you can select that area for it to clean. And that's what I did. So I selected this rug and I told it to get started. Now, the vacuum did a fairly decent job of getting the majority of the salt up on the first go. I did select the mode that means you can go twice, so you basically, it does one way going up and down and then it goes sideways the next time, and that did help because I think the amount of salt and how deep it got into the carpet, it did struggle to get every last little piece. Now this thing has 6,000 pascals of suction power, so it's pretty good and it does a pretty good job, but it did leave some residue salt. I then sent it around for another double cycle and it did manage to get pretty much the entire amount. I did go back and look afterwards and there was a little bit of residue salt, tiny little bit deep in the carpet, but for the majority of it, I was actually pretty impressed. Ultimately, I could leave that and no one would have noticed other than me, or if anyone had for some reason decided to lick carpet. This is a family show, Sam. This is a family show. Anyway, next challenge. So for the obstacle challenge, I wanted to test a few things. One, would this thing pick up random toys? Would it start sucking up and destroying all of my kids' favourite things if they left them out on the rug and I told it to go around and do a clean? I wanted to test how good this was at avoiding things like fabrics and strings and stuff and wires. It did do a pretty good job avoiding larger obstacles, and as soon as some of the obstacles were slightly smaller than the height of the vacuum, unfortunately they got taken under. Now, a lot of things that were slightly too big, the vacuum did a pretty good job of actually getting over. So instead of it going up into the vacuum itself or getting stuck, it would sort of just roll over the top and it would poop it out at the back. But in terms of actually avoiding these obstacles, it didn't do a particularly good job of that. Now, some of the obstacles that were sort of small and thin, for example my tripod legs, it did try to push it over. Now that can be a good thing and a bad thing. In some ways it means that if a door is slightly in the way, it can sometimes push the door open so you can get through, which is quite good. But on the other hand, sometimes it can nudge things and potentially knock things over if they're not very stable, so do bear that in mind. The other 2 obstacles that I really wanted to make sure it avoided was things like clothes and wires, for 2 reasons. One, I didn't want it ruining clothes and wires, and also I didn't want it getting tangled up and me having to constantly go and fix it, because the reason why I have a robot vacuum is that it does it itself. Now with some slightly larger things like blankets and stuff like that, it does avoid it, but with things like my sock that was left lying on the floor, it did go over the top of my sock. It didn't suck it up into the vacuum, which was a good thing, but it was a shame that it didn't spot it and go around. Now, when it comes to wires on this thing, I was pretty disappointed, I'll be honest. One of the things that they advertise is that it has obstacle detection to avoid things like wires, but I put this pair of headphones on the ground and I scrunched them up. I didn't leave them out hanging around, and it just did not care. It went straight over it, it sucked them up, they got caught around the thing, and then it spent the next sort of 2 minutes working out what was going on in its system and why it couldn't work. Seriously, this thing looked like it was going to vomit. So despite the vacuuming challenge doing pretty well, obstacle avoidance is a bit of a miss, unfortunately. If you turn this thing on and set it off around your house, you're going to want to make sure the floor's clear. Now we get on to our disgusting, gross, foody mopping challenge. Now, I will go on to sort of a lot more of the day-to-day stuff in a second, but just want to give you a heads up before I start this challenge. The day-to-day mopping of this thing is amazing. When muddy feet come in through the door and you put your shoes up, it goes through and it sorts out, no problem at all. After dinner, it cleans up things with absolutely no residue mess left on the ground. This challenge is a little bit unfair because it's always going to cause issues, but I just want to give you a heads up as to what happens if it does get into this sort of challenge. Now, a few things to bear in mind. It does have the hot mopping pad wash on. It also does some of the standard mopping sequences. You can do a more thorough mopping sequence on the app if you want to. This is just the standard mop. Now, these things weren't 100% dry when it went through as well, and that caused issues in other ways. A smart person would wipe it with a cloth at least first, but this is a challenge. What happened? Essentially what happened was the vacuum went over all of the disgusting liquids and it sort of sucked up some of the liquids into the vacuum chamber. It also then smushed around the remaining liquids around the pads and then sort of took that on a journey around the kitchen with it. Now when it did get to the pepper challenge, the ground pepper it picked up very, very effectively. The peppercorns, however, that was a bit of an issue. They sort of started getting flicked around everywhere. I actually then put this on for a second run in a larger area to sort of cover the places where these peppercorns have been flicked, and it actually did pick up almost all of the peppercorns other than one or two. So it did a pretty good job considering there was these things running around the entire kitchen. It was a bit of a nightmare. The main issue was the sort of wet stuff. It wasn't particularly good at doing that, and I wouldn't recommend using this to go mop up a spillage. Now, what this did do when it had finished is it went back to the station to clean the mopping pads, and then it came back out for a second run. Now, I just sort of left it to it. I didn't want to intercept it. I wanted it to just go through and do its best job as it was. And it then did a better job. Now, I will add, the spaghetti all got cleaned up. So it did a fantastic job on some of that stuff. So do bear in mind, if you're going to be eating dinner and there's a bit of like spaghetti on the floor or just small bits of food, it does a perfectly good job of clearing that stuff up. You just have to bear in mind, if anything is wet and it's going into the vacuum chamber, you might need to clean that up afterwards. Another thing to bear in mind, I'm not using detergent. This is all happening through just water. Now, when it got to the end of that cycle, it was a bit messy. There was sort of liquid stuff smushed around the floor in a very fine layer. It definitely wasn't as bad as it was before, and you could walk on the floor, but it wasn't clean. And then when I went and inspected the vacuum, it wasn't good. It was pretty bad. Now, the vacuum needed a full cleaning service when I'd finished with it. I had to sort of take all the things apart, give it a proper wash, let it dry, put it back together. Which I will stress, that is actually not that hard to do. You can clean this thing pretty easily. But then once I'd done that, I then sent it through for one final spin once I'd cleaned it. And that was sort of a bit more of a normal thing to do. It cleaned up the rest of it perfectly fine. I didn't have to do anything by hand other than clean the robot vacuum halfway through, because it was a bit of a gravy-filled mess. Now, considering how challenging that was, I wasn't expecting it to do any more. I was expecting it to get stuff inside its chamber and stuff like that because it's hoovering up mess. Now, to give it a fair shot, I did let it go back round just on the mop only mode. That went round twice with a wash in between, and as you can see, I mean, it made an absolutely much better difference. Nothing got sucked up into the vacuum chamber, and honestly, that is how you would want to clean up spillage if you did decide to send it round for one. Now, that pretty much did get rid of everything, but it did leave a stain where I put mustard down. Why I did that, I don't know, because that would have stained anyway. I did have to get on my hands and knees and scrub the living life out of that, so that wouldn't have been picked up by a normal mop or vacuum anyway. You can be a bit more tactical because you can choose it to go round for just a solid mopping cycle on its own, or you can choose it to go around for a vacuum mode on its own and then mop. You can be really sort of personalised with it for however you want it. You can change the sequence for different rooms and all that stuff. So for example, if you know that the messiest room you have is your kitchen, you can make that the last room it cleans on its normal cycle. And you can also set time intervals, so every so often, if it's been cleaning for a little while, it goes back and washes its pads, so it's hot and clean, ready for the next room or the next area it's starting to clean. And sort of every few washes or so, you do have to go and empty out the dirty water, which for some reason stinks. Like, you know that this thing is cleaning particularly well because every time you empty the dirty water tank, it is absolutely disgusting. But you fill it up with nice clean water, and if you want, you can add some detergent into the water. They do sell their own detergent, especially designed for the T20 and their sort of range of mopping robots, so you can do that too. And that just sort of improves all of the sort of cleaningness of the mopping pads and stuff. Now, a couple of things that really impress me and some things that sort of slightly frustrate me. The things that really impress me are this thing, even though the obstacle avoidance wasn't particularly great, the intelligence of it is quite good. If you pick this thing up and move it around, it works out where it is pretty quickly. It can go around and map itself, so it maps the area that it's going to be hoovering and then it turns it into rooms, and then you can go on the app and customize them if you want to. If they, for example, I turned my kitchen countertop bit into like a doorway, so it turned my kitchen into 2 rooms, but it's not 2 rooms, it's just 1 room that's split up into 2 bits. But how it just navigates around areas, for example, if something blocks its path, it finds a new way to go around, and it will try as hard as it can to get into areas that you might not expect it to try and get into. So if you've created new obstacles in the way, it should be able to avoid them as long as they're not tiny things that it's going to go and suck up, like a pair of headphones. Now I'll quickly go on to the thing that annoys me a little bit about this, and it's got nothing to do with its capabilities cleaning or anything like that. The thing that frustrates me about this robot vacuum is Eco, or Yeco, the voice assistant. The voice assistant is a bit rubbish. For some reason, it only understands me if I talk in a very specific American accent. It doesn't pick up my UK English accent very well, even though I've turned the settings to be English UK on the machine. You're meant to say okay Yeco, and I say okay Yeco, okay Yeco, okay Yeco. It doesn't do anything, and then I go okay Yeco, and then it suddenly hears me, and that really winds me up because I just want it to work. Now there are tons of different things that you can do with the voice assistant, and if you have an American accent it probably won't be an issue for you, but for some reason it just doesn't like my voice and my accent, and that bothers me. I take it personally. So guys, this is the Ecovacs T20 Omni. Personally, I am absolutely chuffed with it. It's got pride of place in my kitchen, and it will be there for the foreseeable future. I hope this video helped you sort of understand what its features are and what it does. As always, links are in the description below, and guys, I will see you in the next one.